Get the ballot box back out. The first big test for Labour since its massive win is upon us. It's up against 4 other parties, all vying to get ahead in Thursday's election, with a dizzying array of contest, council seats, mayors and 1 MP. Pat McFadden was one of the architects of Labour's summer success, and he's with us this morning, alongside the Lib Dem's Ed Davey, who's been busy chasing votes, and Kevin Hollinrake with us from the Conservatives, who are trying to avoid disaster. But there's time for some Sunday sparkle. We'll hear from a pair of stars, Jack Lowden and Martin Freeman, on their new stage outing together.
It takes a lot for me to do a play. It takes a lot, because it's a big commitment, you know, it's a huge commitment. And I really, really have to love it. And I just did. I thought, oh, damn, they got me.
And welcome to our team at the desk this week, Carla, the co-leader of the Green Party, and a pair of mayors, Labour's Greater Manchester Mayor, Andy Burnham, and the Conservative Tees Valley Mayor, Ben Houchen. Morning. Let's start, as we always do, by what's making the news today. And the front pages and the headlines everywhere dominated, as you'd expect, by the funeral of Pope Francis. An incredible image on the front of the Sunday Times there, St. Peter's Square in Rome from above. The Sunday Mirror headlines, Hope among the tears at the funeral, with the Sun pointing out 2 different images, the ceremony and the chance for diplomacy, with that picture of President Trump and President Zelensky deep in conversation. The New Look Observer brands that the Pope's last act of peace. And the Sunday Telegraph also uses another version of that image, but picking up on Trump's seeming shift in attitude to Vladimir Putin, at least for now. Here at the BBC, the website's leading with what is a developing story, an attack in Vancouver where a number of people have been killed. There have been extraordinary scenes from the Vatican in the last couple of days, and here are the live shots at the Vatican today. Large crowds gathering again once more outside St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, in the internal city. Extraordinary images from there yesterday. Andy, I just wonder what went through your mind seeing them.
Yes, to be honest, the loss of Pope Francis hit me harder than I expected. He was certainly the most relevant and relatable Pope of my life, and the one who seemed to live the Catholic social teaching that I learnt about in school. So he really connected, and I had the good fortune to meet him.
Didn't you?
Yeah, with the Greater Manchester delegation. And it was the most memorable experience and moving experience of my life. The thing is,
really, of all the things you've done.
Yeah, it was profoundly moving, and all of us felt that who were there with him, because he connected with every single person in the room. You know, something to sort of experience. The thing is, I think the world has lost a really important voice, and the reason is we're living in a time when big tech is monetising hate through social media platforms, and then you've got political and religious leaders almost playing along with that and polarising people and firing up their bases. And that's why he was such an important voice, you know, speaking for the poor, the marginalised, the underdog. That's what he did. And he was also about deeds, not words. He lived it as well. So few people do that these days. So I just hope that those leaders gathered yesterday in St. Peter's Square reflected, perhaps they did when we see some of the images, perhaps they reflected on why, as Pope Francis, why was he so popular around the world and respected? Fascinating
to hear how much it meant to you. I can tell from, you know, watching you, that's really genuine. And Ben, when you saw then those images of world leaders, this mixture of ceremony and diplomacy, what did you think?
Well, I think the Observer's front page is the Pope's last action of peace, I think, sums it up fantastically. And Andy and I were just talking beforehand. We're both, to some extent, lapsed Catholics, and we've both, for whatever reason, gone to the Vatican. You on a delegation, I went personally. And it's a place that, until you go to, it does have an impact on you, maybe as a lapsed Catholic, that you don't appreciate until you go there. And you see the scenes not just yesterday at the funeral, but today as well. This is going to affect millions and millions of people around the world, and it could affect nations, given the circumstances that occurred yesterday.
And Carla, it's rare, isn't it, that you see an event like that? There were 400,000 people said to be in Rome yesterday, something where genuinely people from right around the world come together in one place.
Yeah, an incredibly diverse event by all accounts, and for the last week as well. Now, I don't have the Catholic background that these two have, but I certainly have a lot of admiration for the way the Pope used his position to try and tackle poverty, to tackle climate change. He was very outspoken about the society, humanity's impact on the environment and what we could do better, and also using his position to push for peace and the end to conflict, including notably in Gaza, but also in Sudan and South Sudan. So I have a lot of admiration for how he used his position to, I think, the best effect that he thought he could.
Lots of different ways of being a leader. We'll be back with you three a bit later in the programme. Let's talk a bit more then about that meeting between Presidents Trump and Zelensky at the Vatican yesterday. It was their first face-to-face encounter since their showdown in the Oval Office in February, where voices were raised and tempers flared. You can see there the incredibly intense-seeming conversation between the two. President Trump later said it was productive. Zelensky said it had the potential to become historic. And these other pictures, it seemed to show Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron almost trying to broker the conversation between the two men. They both had their own talks with Zelensky later. And hours after the informal talks, Donald Trump seemed to question whether Vladimir Putin is really interested in peace or had just been tapping him along. Is that a change of tone from America? Well, let's ask Pat McFadden, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, a very close ally of the Prime Minister. It's always good to have you with us. Keir Starmer was closely meeting with President Zelensky yesterday. After that meeting, after President Trump's latest comments, do you agree that a deal for peace could be very close, as the Americans said earlier this week?
Well, I hope so, if it's the right deal. The issue all along in this in recent months has been, yes, everybody wants a stop to the fighting in Ukraine, but what then? And for it to be lasting, what Ukraine wants more than anything is some kind of sense of security that President Putin can't just start this up again in 6 months, in a year, or whatever timescale. And that's why, alongside talk of the fighting stopping, our Prime Minister and other European leaders who are closer to this geographically see this real sense of a need for long-term security for Ukraine so that we don't just have a stop to the fighting, but a lasting peace.
But these images in the last 24 hours do imply that there is some sense of progress. But should people watching be careful about seeing them, looking at the front pages and thinking they mean peace is on the way?
Well, look, they're a lot more encouraging than this scene that we saw in the Oval Office a couple of months ago, where I think everybody was quite disturbed by that scene. And what a contrast yesterday. A welcome contrast, as one of the newspapers has described it as Pope Francis's last act, which has got a powerful statement, I think. And if in, personalities matter and situations matter, and if in bringing those people together in that physical situation, perhaps a little bit stripped back from all the people around them and so on, and able to speak person to person, if that had a powerful impact, that's a very good thing. OK,
well, we'll be monitoring that closely in the hours and days to come. Let's talk then about the elections that are coming this week. And we have, to help us out, brought back none other than Professor Sir John Curtis. Who else? To help us understand the context of all the different contests coming on Thursday. During the general election, you probably remember, he summed up the landscape for us every week in 60 seconds on Sunday. So we've given him the same challenge today.
For the first time, a Eurosceptic party, Reform UK, currently tops the national polls. At 25%, they're narrowly ahead of Labour on 24% and the Conservatives at 22%. Even the Greens at 9% are as popular as they've ever been. And the Liberal Democrats at 14% are at their highest in 6 years. So Thursday's ballot will be a scrap between 5 different parties. Britain's politics is fragmenting before our very eyes. 4 years ago, when Thursday's seats were last contested, the Conservatives on 42% were actually 6 points ahead of Labour and gained over 200 council seats. Reform barely registered. Now the Tories are defending nearly 1,000 of the 1,641 seats up for grabs. heavy losses, perhaps as many as half their seats, seem inevitable.
So it's not a very pretty picture for you. It's not a very pretty picture for the Conservatives either. But if you look back to the last time Labour had a massive landslide, the year after they did that, the Blair government gained councils, and David Cameron also gained councils in 2011 after he came into power. So what's gone so wrong for you that it looks like you're going to get thumped?
Well, I'd say two things. First of all, I don't particularly like calling elections before they happen. You referred in your opening remarks to my role as a campaign coordinator last year, and I was doing constant interviews where people were trying to get me to say what the result was going to be. I don't like to do that. The great thing about a democracy is it's the voters who decide. In terms of the broader picture, we've had a lot of stuff to sort out over the past year. We inherited a difficult situation. We've been taking the decisions to do that. Some of those have not been popular. I accept that. But I think we're beginning to see something of a turnaround at the moment. If I look at the NHS, for example, we've had waiting lists falling for the last 6 months running. What's interesting is the waiting list come down by 200,000, but 50,000 of that is in the most deprived areas where we're putting in an extra effort, because we know that in those areas, if you can get people off the waiting list, you can get them into work. We've got the first breakfast clubs that have opened in the past week, 750 of them. There are more teachers going into training. These are early signs. I don't pretend they've changed everything, but they're movement in the right direction, and people are not yet feeling the full effect of that. But if we keep going and we can go faster than we've done in the last year, then I think we can build on it.
And that's obviously your hope, but it is still extraordinary, is it not, for a government that had a massive majority, a historic majority, not so long ago. Actually, if you look at the polls, if you listen to public sentiment, if you talk to colleagues of yours privately, or people do not believe that the public is on your side. There's a tangible sense of disappointment. And if you do worse in these elections than you did in 2021, when these elections were last up for grabs, when you polled about 29%, what does that say about people's faith in you as a government?
I don't think it's so unusual for governments to not do well in local elections. I remember Jack Straw referring to a meeting many years ago of local authority leaders where they complained to a Labour Prime Minister, we're out because you're in. And it's a pretty common pattern for governments to struggle in local elections. But as I say, I'm not predicting, because I think people calling elections before they happen is a disrespect to the voters. You can get plenty of people to sit in this chair talking their own book. It's not what I do. And I prefer for the voters to do the talking.
But the question is, if that happens, and you know very well, I know you studied polls and focus groups and those kinds of things carefully, you know very well there is a public sense of disappointment with what this government has done so far. Runcorn is a by-election which was your 16th safest seat, and there you're having, at the very least, to fight very, very hard to hold on to it. Are you relaxed about looking like losers come Friday?
No, I'm never relaxed. You've got to earn every vote. You've got to work for it. That's why I take the attitude I do to elections. Victories are earned. They're not proclaimed beforehand. We'll work very hard in Runcorn. The by-election comes about in unfortunate circumstances, but we've got a good candidate. We'll work hard for every vote there, just as we will everywhere else in these elections. They're not taking place in places of natural Labour strength. We are fighting in the shires here. It's not areas of traditional Labour strength. But of course, we'll be out there working for every vote between now and Thursday and getting the best results we possibly can.
But do you believe that the incredibly wide coalition that you built so successfully in July is actually sustainable? Hasn't it already gone pop? I mean, we're looking at an election where you've got 5 parties competing.
It's a fragmented picture, but yes, it is sustainable. It is sustainable.
Really?
If we can deliver in the way that we have started to do. If I could say something about delivery, this is really important because there is a widespread loss of faith in politics and government to deliver anything. And that's why I come on the programme and I point to what's happening in the NHS, because there's a belief out there, and probably every party hears this on the doorstep, doesn't matter who you vote for, you know, it doesn't make a difference. We've had years and years of the NHS getting worse. We inherited last year an NHS with the lowest levels of public confidence in history. We are starting to turn that round. Waiting lists are coming down, not up. New diagnostic centres in your own community, 4.5 million new diagnostic tests in those this year. That's 50% more than the same level last year. Starting to turn around, but it's really important that we focus on delivery, not just as a record for our own party, but to show that politics and government can deliver for people when they're asked to vote for it.
Well, we'll be very interested to hear also what viewers' experiences are, and we loved hearing people's own stories of what has been happening to them. I want just briefly to ask you about another issue. It was a very important story for many people last week when the Supreme Court ruled that when it comes to equalities law, women must mean a woman who's biologically born as a woman at birth. Guidance from the Equalities Commission, the official body who's following up the rules, if you like, says that trans people should therefore not be allowed to use the facilities of their choice. Will you, in government, as an employer responsible for lots of people and many hundreds of government buildings, will you stop trans people then from using changing rooms or bathrooms that they wish to use?
Well, we'll all have to react to the court judgment and the guidance from the EHRC that you said. But yes, that's the logical consequence of the judgment and the guidance that's come out, that people use the facilities of their biological sex. That's what the court said, and that's what the guidance has said.
So that is what the government will ban trans people from
like
using the facilities that they want to choose?
We will react. But look, in reality, when you say ban, am I going to be standing outside toilets? I'm probably not. There isn't going to be toilet police, but that is the logical consequence of the court ruling and the EHRC guidance.
Do you acknowledge, as a senior government minister, that the consequences of this ruling, indeed the ruling itself, have caused quite widespread anxiety among the trans community?
Well, I hope everybody's treated with kindness in this. And I think we've probably talked about it in past interviews. This has been a debate where there's very strong feelings around it. But the important thing of the last week is the court has given clarity about facilities. I think that will travel through to sport, to other parts of public policy as well, and we'll all have to respond to the ruling of the court and the new guidance that's been issued.
There has, as you say, been very strong feelings on this issue for a number of years, including in the Labour Party. Do you regret how Labour treated some of those who expressed concern about what was going on, some of those who campaigned actually for more protection of single-sex spaces? Do you regret how some of them were treated?
Well, we always said we would protect single-sex spaces. That was in our manifesto. It's in the Equality Act. This is a Labour Act. We passed it the last time we were in government.
But you know very well, and people watching know very well,
backed up the Act.
But people know very well watching this that the Prime Minister was busy often saying trans women are women. David Lammy accused some people campaigning or raising concern of being dinosaurs who wanted to hoard their rights. So do you regret the way that Labour treated some of those people who were expressing concern about what was happening before this ruling?
Look, I think it's been a debate where people have had strong feelings. There have been people hurt in the debate.
And do you regret that?
I think we need to go through this whole thing, as the Prime Minister said at Prime Minister's Questions on Wednesday, treating people with dignity and respect. That was true before the ruling, it's true after the ruling, and that's the way that I hope we can go forward.
OK, Pat McFadden, Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. It's always good to have you with us in the studio. Thank you very much indeed for being with us this morning. Well, millions of you can tell the politicians what you think at the ballot box on Thursday. But we want to know what you think right now. You can email us, kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk, or on social media, use the hashtag. And the WhatsApp number is 08000 282 161. More of that later, or in our Thursday newsletter. But listening to Pat McFadden was Sir Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader. He's been back in his happy place on the campaign trail in the last couple of weeks. There he is. I don't know what that is. That's a hobby horse jumping over little fences. And there, I'm not sure if hedgehogs have the vote. That would be quite something for the franchise. But let's hear what he has got to say about what's happening politically this morning. Thanks for being with us. Let's just start on that issue.
Good morning, Laura. Nice to be with you too.
Good to have you with us. Let's start on the consequences of the Supreme Court decision. Do you agree with the guidance that has come out from the EHRC, the Equalities Commission, saying that trans people should not be allowed to use the facilities that they choose?
Well, the Quality Commission is trying to put effect through guidance about the Supreme Court ruling, and we're going to have to study it. My initial view is it's trying to do exactly what it needs to do, but there are lots of questions still to be answered about how this is enforced, for example, just as Pat McFadden was saying. So we want to ask more questions about this because we do need answers. Lots of people are confused. Lots of people are quite worried and anxious in the trans community and elsewhere. And so we do need more guidance. Let me give you one example, Laura. I'm so pleased you've asked me about this, actually, because although I've talked about it in a few questions, I've not had a chance to give a proper discussion, and it does need a thoughtful discussion. So one example is for trans man. Now, a trans man is a biological woman, and under the court ruling, as I understand it, they can't use a man's toilet, but should use a women's toilet. And I'm not sure if the guidance is dealing with that, because first of all, would the trans man want to use that woman's toilet? And secondly, if they go into that woman's toilet, that could cause some anxiety, obviously. And even worse than that, because safety should be at the core of how we test these different guidelines. Would that mean that a man could go into a woman's toilet and say, oh, I'm a trans man? That would cause even more worries about for lots of people. So it is a bit confusing, Laura. I'll be very frank with you. We need to debate these issues. I'm glad we are getting some of this clarification and guidance. What I think we do need, and what Liberal Democrats would like to see, is more debate in Parliament about this, so we can tease out these issues and try and get a solution we can all agree with, that's clear for people, respects people's rights. That's absolutely critical to this whole issue.
So you don't think then that there is now clarity on this issue? Because when the judgment emerged, the government said, we welcome the clarity. That was their line. You don't think the situation is clear yet?
Well, there's clarity with respect to the Equality Act. But as the Supreme Court itself said, in law, a trans woman is a woman, except in regards of the Equality Act. We absolutely accept that ruling. You'd expect us to do that. We believe in the rule of law, and the Supreme Court has explained what the Equality Act means. It's given clarity on that, but now we have to make sure that the practical implications are understood. That's where these guidance that you talked about are supposed to help. But as we look at that guidance, I think there's still lots of questions raised that haven't been answered, like the example I gave.
Okay.
So in good faith, we need a proper discussion. Yeah.
Do you think that the Lib Dems in the last years made some mistakes in recent times over its treatment of people who were involved in this debate? In January, you had to give a payout for discrimination after booting out a female candidate who wore a T-shirt saying a woman was an adult human female. So have the Lib Dems made mistakes?
Well, I think we've all learned a lot through this process. I certainly have. I know all parties have. I've talked to MPs across Parliament. I think we've all been on a learning curve, and I think organisations have. And of course, when you're on that, the mistakes I'm sure will be made. But we've tried our best to listen to people, both inside the party and outside the party. And we want to work with others because we do need to make sure that everyone's rights are protected. And let's be clear what we mean by everyone's rights being protected. Violence against women and girls is almost 20% of violent crime. It's appalling. We need to tackle that. And violence against trans people has been on the rise. So when we talk about protecting people's rights, it's about stopping violence against people. Nothing could be more serious. So we all have to take this seriously. We have to work together. And key to this is taking the toxicity and hostility out of the argument. Okay. That's why we're saying, let's have a good faith, grown-up debate in Parliament, and let's try to come to a solution where everyone's rights are protected.
OK, let's then talk about the local elections. And the Lib Dems for years have had a reputation of being, good pavement pounders and door knockers. What's your ambition for Thursday night this week? Do you think you could become the second biggest party in local government in terms of controlling town halls?
Well, that's certainly possible. We're quite excited about our prospects next Thursday. we're finding on the doorsteps people liking what our local campaigners are saying. In the vast majority of the races, we're really fighting hard in places like Oxford and Cambridgeshire, Shropshire, Wiltshire, Gloucestershire, Devonshire, Devon, Cornwall, Hertfordshire, Buckinghamshire and so on. It's a two-horse race between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives. The Conservatives have been running most of these councils for a long time, and people remember how the national Conservative government let them down. They feel taken for granted by the local Conservatives, and they're turning to the Liberal Democrats. They like what we say. For example, you talk about pavement politics. They like our community-style politics, that we try to get things done, whether it's potholes or anything in their local town or village. And you don't have to take my word for it. Kemi Badenoch was recently interviewed, and she says, oh, those Liberal Democrats, they're the sort of people who fix your church roof. They're liked by the community, but they're not on Twitter. And I think that says it all, actually. We do like fixing things, getting things done. We are from the local community. Conservatives seem to have given up that space, haven't they? And
you do seem to quite like being on TikTok, Ed Davey. I mean, we got used to your campaign stunts in the general election, and there's a whole new breed of Ed Davey does dad dancing on TikTok. I mean, you're trying to also raise very serious issues about the Trump trade deal. You're calling for a vote on that in Parliament. I'm not being rude about your dad dancing, but does it really help you look like a serious party?
It looks like Trump dancing.
Well, I'm glad you've been watching my TikTok feed, because if you go on that, you'll see a lot of my questions at Prime Minister's questions are on there. You'll see some of our policy proposals. You see our manifesto. You see lots of very serious things on our TikTok feed. But you're right, we've mixed them up with some fun things. And I've been poking a little fun at President Trump. And, you know, I think whether it's asking serious questions to the Prime Minister or poking fun at the current incumbent at the White House, I think the truth is he's a dangerous person in our world. That what he's doing with respect to trade across the world is threatening the global economy, our economy here in the UK. And the way he's behaved, at least hitherto, with respect to Russia and Ukraine, I think has shocked many people. You know, during the general election, I went through village after village, town after town. I kept seeing people with their Ukrainian flags, often with the Union Jack. Very patriotic, very much Britain behind Ukraine, and I believe we need to be. And when we have a president in the United States who has done something that no other president has done before and sort of taken a lot of that support away, we need to work with our European colleagues. We need European cooperation, build up our defences on the continent so we can repel people like President Putin.
But just briefly, Ed Davey, when it comes though to another aspect of the relationship with America, Europe is pushing the government to give a vote in Parliament if there is such a thing emerges as a trade deal with the United States. But isn't the reality that there has to be compromise in order to get a deal that might benefit our economy when it really needs it?
Well, let's see what the compromises are that the government proposes. I mean, one of the reasons we're calling for a vote in Parliament is because it would give that greater scrutiny. What deals have the government done on farming? Because we want to protect British farmers from inferior products from the United States. What have they done on online safety for children? What have they done to our NHS? They're allowing a big American private health companies in. So we need to scrutinise that to find out what the government's done. And do you know what? Labour used to support this. We've an Earth Day policy paper, just 2021, just 3 years ago, where the Labour Party then was saying any government on trade negotiations should be really clear with Parliament, giving the information in advance of the negotiations, and then a vote on the final and debate on the final outcome of the trade negotiations. So we're just saying to Labour, look, do what you said you wanted to do. We're going to be laying a bill in Parliament next week, which is basically going to enshrine or try to enshrine in law what Labour said they wanted to do when it came to negotiations on trade and a trade agreement. I think the British people would expect there to be a vote in Parliament, and so we're going to take Labour for their word. Are they going to allow the elected representatives to look at the compromises that the government are putting forward and work out what it's actually in the interests of our country? OK,
we will see what happens on that front, as so many other fronts. Ed Davey, thanks very much for your time this morning in the closing days of yet another election campaign. I'm sure we'll talk to you soon. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Now then, you three have been patiently listening as we've been talking to Pat McFadden and Ed Davey. Carla, then let's talk about your party's position on some of these issues. And let's start with trans rights. Now, what is the Green Party's response to this guidance that we've had from the Equalities Commission in the last couple of days, which you know, Pat McFadden says it's brought clarity. This is what everyone's going to have to do now. What do you make of that?
We're really worried that the guidance from the EHRC has been rushed, clearly. It's been ill thought out, in my opinion, and it's really obvious that they have not listened to trans people, possibly not consulted them at all in the preparation of this guidance. Well, I think it's quite clear that it will create the risk of discrimination, direct and indirect, against trans people, especially in workplaces. I think it has the potential to create some unintended consequences, as Ed Davey was saying. I think it hasn't considered the consequences of what happens if you say to trans people that they are not allowed to go to the toilet in their gender or in their birth sex. Well, and almost as an afterthought, the guidance says, but they shouldn't be left with nowhere to go. But there's no suggestion of how that's going to be resolved.
So what do you want to see happen then?
Well, it is obviously early days. It only came out on Friday night. I have already been and will continue to be liaising closely with human rights and LGBT organisations to get their expert advice. But I won't hesitate to push for changes in legislation if it becomes apparent that that's necessary. And now, I'm not a legal expert, but I think it may be necessary because it does seem to leave some big gaps. And it seems to fly in the face of the strong tradition of tolerance we have in Britain. For example, the EHRC guidance seems to be saying that if a lesbian association or venue wants to be inclusive, wants to include trans women, and let's bear in mind that lesbian women, non-trans lesbian women are amongst the most supportive of trans people in the whole of society, so quite a lot of lesbian LGBT organisations are going to want to include trans people. The advice, seems to say that they won't be allowed to.
So would you like the guidance to be withdrawn and then we'll...
Yes, exactly. The Greens are calling for the guidance to be withdrawn. It's clearly rushed and ill thought out and they haven't consulted all the people who'd be affected.
OK.
We're saying withdraw it, think again, consult everyone who'd be affected by this guidance and then come out with something more thought out.
OK, let's then talk about the local elections. So the Greens, you had big success in the general election. You increased your number of MPs. You've been polling better since you've got into Parliament. What do you hope to achieve on Thursday?
That's right. And the context is actually that the Greens have been growing in the local elections steadily. We are the only party in the UK who's increased our number of councillors every single year for the last 7 years. And I'm pretty confident that this is going to be the 8th. Not to take votes for granted, but having been out, as you would expect, all over the country speaking to voters, people are feeling so let down by not only the Conservatives after their 14 years in government, but also by this Labour government who promise change and are really actually in power, only offering tinkering around the edges. And so I think there's a big appetite for sending Labour and Conservatives a message. And while some people are looking at reform for that, a lot of people are thinking, well, I don't just want to vote for division and rhetoric. I want to vote for some hard-working local Green councillors who are actually going to fix things.
I mean, Andy, it does look like a very complicated picture. I mean, it does look, we're hearing the word fragmentation is sort of all the rage. What kind of a set of elections do you think this will be? Well,
they're clearly going to be difficult, as Pat McFadden said, but he's right. This government's only 10 months in. I think people forget that at times. Already, NHS waiting lists are moving in the right direction. I know how big a challenge that is from my role as Health Secretary. They've renationalised the railways. A lot of governments should have done that. This one has done that. But they'll be difficult. But what I would say to people getting ready to vote is it's hard to judge on what mayors have done, Labour mayors have done, and there's 4 mayoral races. I would say, if you look at the evidence, we have put public transport back under public control, created an entirely new public transport system in Greater Manchester, and Labour mayors are reducing the cost of transport. We've also given the north of England a bigger voice. Ben may have helped a little bit as well, but Labour mayors have really done that, working together. And we will be presenting new analysis, actually, next week, the Northern Arc, which is about Liverpool Airport, Warrington, Manchester Airport, Manchester, then into Leeds, Sheffield, Hull, where there's a mayoral race. We have new analysis that says that part of the country can deliver more growth, more new homes than the Oxford-Cambridge art that is often prioritised by Whitehall. So the north of England, if we really complete that sort of corridor of northern Labour mayors speaking for the growth that we need, for the big infrastructure we need in the north, that could be a real game changer. And one last point to say quickly, the mayoral role, I don't know what Ben thinks about this, maybe we have a different view, but it doesn't suit divisive politics, in my view. The power of the mayor, the superpower of the mayor, is to bring people together from different backgrounds, public, private sector, community, organisations. You've got to be a unifying force, place first rather than party first. I would worry about those bringing divisive politics to the role.
Sounds a bit, though, like you're saying, like it would all be fine if everybody could just vote for Andy Burnham and people like you. I mean, that, you know, your party has been struggling significantly since it took power. There was a real plummet in its polling ratings, almost going pop as soon as they moved into number 10.
My point is, you're not voting for the government. You're voting for somebody in the mayoral races to lead your area. And the evidence is mayors, Labour mayors, but I do respect what Ben has achieved in the North East. You know, we take a place-first approach, not party-first. It's as much about the person and their values and their party that, you know, it's important when you get to that ballot box.
Well, Ben, but your party is looking like a pretty grim time on Thursday. Do you think their performance might lead to Kemi Badenoch actually being booted out?
So I think it's interesting. I mean, listening to Pat, listening to Andy, you've got 10 months of a Labour government. I mean, 11 years into a Tory government in 2021, we were making significant gains, including the Hartlepool by-election, and it was the same day as our election in 2021. We were just talking about that. So I think the argument of being 10 months in isn't a great one. And using things like the NHS is a typical one for Labour going into an election when you think, well, one of the reasons waiting times have come down is because the unions have stopped striking. You know, that brings waiting down times quite a lot.
I
mean, I'm going to make.
I
will make a prediction
because the Tory government managed to sort it out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I accept all of that. I'm going to make a prediction in that I think it's going to be an extremely tough election for the Conservative Party. I think we are going to lose a lot of seats. We are also going to win some, though. I think I would predict that I think Paul Bristow, our mayoral candidate in Cambridge and Peterborough, is probably going to win. But I also think, and again, you should always judge yourself on your own performance rather than somebody else's, but relative to Labour, I actually think Labour will have a worse election than the Conservative Party. So if you take the 4 mayoral elections, for instance, they currently hold 2 of those, 2 are new. I'm confident that Labour are going to lose the 2 that they currently hold. And in places like Lincolnshire, you know, we talked about British Steel in the last couple of weeks, right? You know, Labour come in and say they've saved British Steel, even though they caused a large part of the mess.
But I know it's
literally. So just let me make this point. The government have kind of come in to say that they're the saviour of that area, and I think next week you're going to find most of those people are going to walk into a ballot box and put Labour in 3rd place.
But many of them are going to go to Reform. They're not necessarily going to go to you. They're going to go to Reform. And you have raised concerns previously about Kemi Badenoch spending too much time making speeches to think tanks, not doing enough to take on that threat. So I'll ask you again, do you think this time next week she's going to be safe in her job?
Yeah, I do think she will be safe in her job. I think, you know, coming off an historic defeat of what the worst election result for nearly 200 years, it has been tough because for the first time, I think ever, you've got another right-of-centre party who is eating away at that. Whereas if you go back years, it would allow a party to
take... for a pact, haven't you? I mean, what's happening to the Tory party here?
To be fair, I didn't call for a pact.
Well, I thought you did. No, it sounded like you did. I mean, it feels like the Tory party just losing any sense. It's being dragged, isn't it? And it's losing any sense of itself.
The example I used was if at the next election there are a number of MPs in the Tory party and Reform that created a significant majority, then obviously there's going to be a conversation to form a coalition or some sort of pact.
So you are talking about a coalition potentially in the general election?
I'm talking about the practicalities of keeping Labour out of government because we've seen what they've done in the last 10 months.
It's a terrible place for the Conservative Party to find itself. You know, the party of Michael Heseltine, Ken Clark.
I'm saying that if in that situation there's absolutely a conversation over the next 3 years, Kemi and the Conservative Party have a huge amount to do to regain that trust, put forward the Conservative argument so that people don't go to Reform. I mean, the big thing about all of this, both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party really need to get a grip of, is that the realignment in British politics is real. You know, and the red wall, as of next week, I think is going to go significantly Reform. If that doesn't send a clear signal to the Labour Party as well as the Conservative Party, then Reform have a longer-term future. But there's still 3 years in which to battle that, as long as we can get ourselves right, we get our message right, and the Labour government stop creating the mess that it's creating in government.
But what about in your area, and Carla, I'll bring you in just a sec, but what about in your area, Ben, where, you know, you've got a big mandate, you had a lot of popularity, you got your job very solidly, but just recently you've been given what's called a best value notice, which is where the government has said you're not spending money properly in your area. That's your record. You've been told you're not spending money properly. Are people not worried about that?
No, because actually this whole political saga played out in my last election. I got the 3rd highest share of the vote of any mayor in the country.
So it didn't matter,
and the reason
the
government did that, the reason the government did that is they actually wanted to do nothing, but they had to do something. And so they did as little possible without doing anything. Because you've got to remember, there are some Labour MPs who've been pretty vicious to me over the last 4 or 5 years, who've made some very outrageous statements that they refused to back up. And there was a big political fight at the last election which again played out in public, and the electorate said that they didn't believe the Labour Party, they believed me, and they delivered me with the third highest share of the vote.
Well,
now, interestingly, if you look at my area, we don't have local elections this year, but all of the polls would suggest that the whole of the Tees Valley area, which is one Conservative MP with the rest of Labour MPs, there would be no Labour MPs left in the Tees Valley.
OK.
And if there was an election today, I'd put my mortgage on the fact that that would be true.
OK, well, we will see. There's so much we could talk to about you. And Carla, we'll be back with you later. And I also want to tell people that we have managed to purloin some early snaps of all three of you on the campaign trail many years ago. So do stay tuned for that, because the pictures are quite incredible. And do go to the website if you want to find out if there are elections in your area. The full list of candidates, all the information is there for you on the BBC News website. Let's talk then straight away to Kevin Hollinrake, who's a member of Kemi Badenoch's shadow team, and put what Ben Houchen's been saying to him. Kevin, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Ben Houchen's just told us that at some point before the general election, there might have to be a coalition between the Reform and the Conservative Party if that's how the seats stack up. Would you be up for that?
I don't, not at all. There'll be no pacts with Reform. I mean, how can you have a pact with a party that wants to nationalise large swathes of UK industry and wants to privatise the NHS, that seems to favour Vladimir Putin over Ukraine? You know, it says it's Ukraine's fault that Russia invaded it. There are some real differences between us. Reform exists because of mistakes we made previously. What we need to do is correct those mistakes, show people that we're going to get it right this time on immigration. We had many successes over the last 14 years, but we did get some things wrong. We need to show people that we'll get it right this time. And the policies you'll see coming forward from Kemi Badenoch will be proper Conservative policies. I worked for Kemi for 18 months in the Department of Business and Trade. I've never, ever seen her say one thing and do another. She does what she says she's going to do.
But have you got time to do that? I mean, Ben Houchen's just been telling us that the Reform vote is real. They might have a long-term future. We'll see that this week. If the Conservatives are consistently coming behind Reform, isn't there an inevitable logic that you either split the vote on the right, or you come together in some way or another and then you actually have a chance at power again? You might be the junior partner.
Well, I don't see it like that. The polls today are not the polls that will be in 2029. We know all that for certain. And I understand why people are voting Reform. It's a protest vote right now. And even Rupert Lowe, a senior figure in Reform, said that the party is a party of protest. I understand why they're doing that. What we need to do is get things right. It will take time to do that. There is no doubt this Thursday will be a difficult night for us in terms of seats. But remember what people are voting for this Thursday. They're not voting for the next few weeks. They're voting for a councillor who's going to represent them over the next 4 years. And mayors, indeed. We've got some fantastic candidates, be it Anne Hanley in Hull and East Yorkshire, Rob Waltham in Greater Lincolnshire, Paul Bristow in Cambridge and Peterborough, or you've got Steve Smith, West of England. All these people are proven leaders in their local areas, a proven track record of delivery. What we're talking about here is better services. We provide better services at lower cost. Those are the pure facts. That's what people should vote for.
Well, I will remind people that candidates' names are all on the website for them. We're not into people reading out lists of the person who's standing for their particular party. But isn't the point here that Kemi Badenoch... I didn't read it. I'm sure you knew it in your head, but the list is there for people to see if they want. But in terms of your performance, if, as seems very likely, and you've been busy managing expectations down the way, Kemi Badenoch herself has said nowhere is safe. So if, as appears very likely, there are situations around the country where Conservative councils lose their majority and they might be able to run things with the help of Reform, would you, as part of the party leadership, say to them, don't do that? Would you forbid Conservatives from working with Reform?
Well, we'll issue guidance to local councils. I personally think it would be a mistake to form a coalition with Reform. But you know, I think there are ways of working together on a vote-by-vote basis to make sure you can deliver the agenda of a proper Conservative agenda in those local areas. That's what we want to do. The focus right now is winning every single vote, convincing people, showing people we have changed. We've got some things wrong, but in general, we deliver far better services at lower cost than any other party. That's what people are voting for. That's our focus right now, not what happens after the 1st of May, how people vote on the 1st of May.
But in a specific case where there is no one party with an overall majority, you would not forbid Conservatives from working alongside Reform councillors in order to get things done. That's what I'm hearing from you.
Well, the most important thing is getting things done. That's why we all enter politics, to get things done. Of course, you've got to prioritise the needs of local people. And we respect the right of local leaders to make those kind of decisions. But I say there'll be no pact with Reform. That has been completely ruled out by Kemi Badenoch, quite rightly too. They are a different party to us. They're not a Conservative party. They have some very radical views, I think, which I think when people dig beneath the surface will realise are not consistent with the kind of Conservative values we have. We have strong Conservative values. We've got a strong Conservative leader who is bringing those values back to this party. I think over time, and it will take time, people will see that and will decide that the Conservative leader is the right person to lead this party and will bring forward those proper Conservative values and policies.
But it doesn't seem that strong when Kemi Badenoch has been saying there won't be pacts, there won't be coalitions at a national level, and yet Ben Houchen, Robert Jenrick recorded suggesting something similar. Esther McVeigh, another prominent Conservative, has been heard saying something similar. But people will have heard your answer to that. I just want to finally ask you, we know you're a bit of a betting man. You had a flutter on the general election, as I understand it. Not one of the people, I should say, who got into trouble for that, but you had a flutter on the result. Would you bet your mortgage on Kemi Badenoch still being the leader at the time of the next general election?
Yes.
Very clear answer. Kevin Hollinrake, thank you very much indeed for being with us this morning. It's good to have you with us on the programme from North Yorkshire, God's own county. Thank you. Now, we've heard from a pair of mayors and a pair of leaders now today. Now time for a pair of stars. Martin Freeman has been Watson from Sherlock, Bilbo Baggins from The Hobbit, and of course Tim from The Office. And Jack Lowden, the actor, has been River Cartwright from Slow Horses, the bank robber, Kenneth Noye in Gold, and maybe, just maybe, the next James Bond. Well, the two of them are now working together in a dark comedy called The Fifth Step that's coming soon to the London stage. They told me yesterday how performing this intense two-hander, only the two of them for the whole show, has had a real impact on both of them.
The fifth step is where a person brings their list of wrongs to their sponsor and confesses basically everything that they feel bad about that they've done in their life that they want to get off their chest. So that's what the fifth step is.
But I just wonder, because even reading it, it does set off lots of questions in your mind about things that in your past. It talks about upbringing, the relationship with his father. You talk about witnessing, and I don't want to give things away, but it's very, very personal and confessional even in this way. It feels they come together to share all these things from their past. So I wonder if going through that and inhabiting those characters has brought anything for you that you feel you've learned about going through that process?
I tell you what it has done for me is that because it's a dark comedy, it has confirmed in me that I try to laugh at myself as much as possible, and how powerful that is as a tool to coping with anything difficult in anyone's life. It's not always instantly accessible depending on what the situation is, but it's really sort of made me feel that laughing is sometimes, it's corny, but it is the best medicine. And I've done other projects that involve the world of AA, and it is amazing how, and I've sat in real groups that it is just very funny, and they're brilliant raconteurs, and it's a way of self-healing, is being able to sort of pull the poison out of really the lowest ebb that you find a lot of people.
And in terms of how this project came about and why you are working together, how did it happen, Ryan?
I had never met Jack, we didn't know each other, but I thought, yeah, I can see him doing that, and I think I can see us doing that, hopefully happily. It was too good for me not to do, it takes a lot for me to do a play. It takes a lot, because it's a big commitment, it's a huge commitment, and I really, really have to love it, and I just did. I thought, oh, damn, they got me.
Well, I was going to ask, because, both of you probably at the moment could pretty much pick and choose almost any project that you wanted to do. You've both had massive successes and all sorts of different projects that people will recognise you from different shows. Jack, lots of people will be probably going to see this because of the massive success of Slow Horses.
Are you in that?
I am.
Are you?
Just a small part. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should watch it sometime. It's meant to be quite good.
I hear it.
You always run off by yourself trying to be a hero.
The Do you think that there are things about that show where if people haven't seen it, you know, disgraced spies turn out to be sort of better than MI5 at doing the job? Is there anything kind of outlandish that you learned in the process of that series? But did you find out real things?
About MI5?
Yeah. And are you allowed to tell us if you did? I mean, that's a different question.
We did a day with an ex-MI6 officer who was helping us to train in the art of surveillance and counter-surveillance and sort of walking along, following a mark and all that kind of stuff. And he gave us a lecture for a bit, and then he said, right, we're going to go outside and do this. And then he pulled the shutters down up on the window, and he saw that it was raining, and he went, oh no, maybe we shouldn't. You're like, what? You're MI6? So MI6, I don't know, they don't operate in the rain. Maybe that's because they're abroad a lot.
That's very reassuring, isn't it? Do you ever do it? I mean, have you ever, like, chased, you know, well, surreptitiously been...
Chased people? No, I haven't chased anyone, no. Have you followed anyone you shouldn't?
No, but I have wondered about that. about how difficult it is to tail someone.
Or if you are being tailed.
I have thought about that as well.
Really?
I have thought about that. Yeah, well, because sometimes you are tailed.
Yeah.
I am tailed occasionally.
What do you mean?
Yeah.
Just by people follow you around sometimes, you know, and they think you don't know, and of course you do know.
What, fans?
Yeah, if you can call them that, yeah. let's call them that, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but it's people who just want to follow you around.
Yeah.
Does that feel scary sometimes?
Not scary, more annoying, I suppose. Yeah, more not. It's annoying because they think you don't know they're doing it, and so occasionally I do just turn around and go, look, what do you want? And they're like, how did you know? It's like because you've been doing it for half an hour and you're not in MI6. Yeah,
But what kind of, have you ever had a sort of an extended conversation with someone?
Yeah,
in that
I've tried to. I tried to be reasonable with people. I tried to sort of reason with them to say, look, I'm not a prop. This is not. Well, I mean, he thinks I am. But, you know, I've gone up in his estimation. As a warm prop, I'm one of the best around.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, a woman came to me when I was stood at a baggage reclaim in an airport, and she said, "Thank God you're here. I feel safer."
What did you
I
say?
said, "I'm not. I'm not in MI5." Yeah. She felt safer because I was there in the baggage reclaim area. But I don't work for MI5. I'm an actor.
I was hoping I wouldn't have to kill you.
Turn the car around now! You're a danger, little stranger.
Your number is now up to be the next Mr. Darcy, Pride and Prejudice, and everybody's probably got their favourite one. But how are you going to do it differently? And I've got to ask if there's going to be any splashing around in a lake.
I don't know. Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. I quite like the idea of being a ginger Darcy. I think that's really breaking down barriers. One of the great last barriers to be broken down.
Agreed.
Yeah. And I quite like the idea of sort of me coming along and doing something else with it, or just copying one of them. Because some of the guys that have played it are amongst some of the best. I mean, Matthew McFadden, to me, is one of the best actors on the planet. So if I just try and copy him, maybe that's all right as well.
Then you'll be fine.
Yeah.
But ginger.
Yeah, change it up.
You both could be doing, you know, big budget TV, big budget movies. You have your pick of anything. Why is it still worth doing theatre?
My love in all of this stuff that we do is great actors. Watching them and being with them, and Martin is one of the greats, and so to be with him is I don't really care what the play is about. In essence, if I get to play around with someone like Martin, it's just a joy.
That's extremely generous. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm having a really, really lovely time as well. It's I agree. Like one of the greatest pleasures of our job is just what happens between you and the other person, and what's happening for me. I hope it's good, and I hope people like it. I hope people come. It's extremely enjoyable for me because he keeps, you want someone to keep you on your toes and like to give it back and, throw the ball back. I mean, and Jack is truly, I do take the mickey a lot about everything, but truly he's a fantastic, quick thinker. He's open, he's funny, he knows where the funny is. Doesn't always have to be there though. He's not a tart sometimes, but so am I sometimes. You need to be sometimes. But no, it's a real joy, genuinely.
Well, it's lovely to hear you talking both so excitedly about working with each other. It's an incredible read on the page. So once it's actually available for people to see on stage, I'm sure it will be a very thrilling thing for people to go and see. Well, Jack and Martin, thank you so much for coming in. It's been a pleasure to talk with both of you, to hear about this new project, which will be on before too long.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And The Fifth Step by David Ireland will open at London's Soho Place Theatre on the 12th of May. It was a pleasure to meet that pair. Now, let's then get back to the business of elections. And as promised, I can reveal to you the young campaigning antics of our team at the desk today. Let's have a look at a young Carla Denyer there on the campaign trail back in 2019, I think. Yeah. And then a young Ben Houchen, now a member of the House of Lords. There he is, pounding the pavements. And I'm trying to spot who else might be there. I think that was Chris Heaton-Harris next to him, who ended up being a member of the cabinet. And a young Andy Burnham. There we are, with glasses and a bob. Do we call that a bob, Andy? I'm not sure. You're very generous, all three of you, for sharing those campaigning pictures for us. Because being on the campaign, I mean, it's hard yards for people who do it as a living. And this time particularly, as we've been touching on, there's something really interesting going on in British politics. A lot of learned columnists and experts would say this sort of fragmentation. Do you think it's permanent, Carla?
I think that the era of two-party politics is over. I think the writing's been on the wall for a while, and we're really seeing that in this election. I mean, we saw John Curtis's bar chart earlier, where 5 parties have all got significant bars in that graph. If that's not an argument for proportional representation, I don't know what is, because we're facing a situation where in the next general election, the winner, the government, could have less than 30% of the public support.
But haven't we heard it before? I mean, Andy, I remember there have been plenty of occasions, you know, around the coalition time, then also when the SNP was incredibly strong in Scotland, two-party politics is dead, and then you get near a general election and suddenly people swarm back to the two tribes. But maybe you two shouldn't be sitting comfortably, I don't know. I
think there's a degree of that splintering that Carla's talking about. But I do feel the public are fed up with politics as usual. And this is why I come back to the mayoral role and the mayoral races.
I knew you were going to do that.
But it's important because it adds a different dimension. It's a different thing. And it has allowed Westminster, people to challenge Westminster more, and we've done a lot of that, haven't we? And actually line up together a bit more. And people like to see that as well. So I do feel that's kind of a good thing. And the north of England, by May next year, will have full devolution. It'll have mayors everywhere. So that, I think, is a positive change. And I think we need to sort of really, you know, the message is to the government, you know, really back this now, this change. Give more agency to people at a local level. Fund local government properly is another part of this. But we'll present this new analysis to the Treasury and to the Business and Trade Select Committee this week. It's time to back devolution properly.
But politics is still a big ecosystem, and there are, Ben, you know, there are always whispers about somebody still young who's reached a big, powerful position at a relatively young age, and there are always whispers about whether or not you'd fancy a tilt at the House of Commons, so you give up your perch in the House of Lords and maybe have a go at the Richmond seat, which is Rishi Sunak's at the moment. I just wonder if you want to take this opportunity to tell people if you were interested or not in doing that.
No, I don't think Rishi's going anywhere anytime soon. But just if I can add to Andy's point, I think what's happening when you talk about the splintering of the vote is a bit Brexit 2.0 to me. I think people don't like what the government has done, whether that's winter fuel benefits, etc., etc. They still haven't forgiven us over the last 3 or 4 years for what we did, and Kemi's trying to turn that around, but hasn't quite done that yet. And I think people in parts of the Red Wall want to break the system again. And I think they'll look towards reform in other parties to try and send a signal that the system's not working for them, and therefore they want to change.
Well, it's going to be a fascinating few days. I'm afraid we must leave it there, but I'm sure we'll be speaking to all three of you again very soon. Thank you to all of our guests today. Thank you to you, most of all, for watching at home. It's the London Marathon, which is underway, and the Manchester Marathon as well. Thousands upon thousands of super fit or foolish souls have been pounding the streets today. That's the race there. Look at them go. That's why we've been on BBC Two this morning, but the coverage of the marathon continues on BBC One for you. That will be across all BBC platforms today. And in terms of the next few days, well, you can insert your own jokes about whether politics is a marathon or a sprint. But on Thursday, this is what will happen. Let's hope this works. Can we flick the switch? And as if by magic, on Thursday night and through Friday, I'll be with you across BBC channels for special election coverage of the Runcorn by-election, those mayoral contests we've been discussing, and the race for thousands of council seats across England. So by the time we meet again next Sunday, the political map will have been redrawn a bit, with plenty of your votes sketching out the contours of what comes next. That will give us plenty to talk about next Sunday, when I will look forward to seeing you, same time, back in our normal place on BBC One. Look forward to seeing you then.